want to say something about the two things, two separate things. One is in the Salah, you can hardly read a book of theology when it comes to Salah that doesn't remind you that in the cycles of prostrating and standing up, you are also reminding yourself of the very nature of creation that Allah has put for us, that nothing remains in one form. So in one of the nice lafatat that is pointed to is that even it is in standing up and prostrating before God, you are reminded of your own strength to endure whatever hardship and whatever tests. That so the very necessity of persevering. Prayer, the Salawat al-Khams, is an essential cord to perseverance, and that is why cutting that cord is so dangerous. You really risk becoming adrift. The other thing is that the 5 prayers is the essential cord to your Lord. However, if you do the exercise of reading the Sunnah of the Prophet, one of the things that will strike you immediately is that the Prophet and his family and his companions did not stop at the 5 prayers. So you constantly find them praying much more than the 5 prayers. Now, so what I'm saying is that the 5 prayers is the essential core for the backbone of Islamicity. But as Allah opens your heart, you might be drawn, and you will go through periods where you will find the invitation in your heart to pray much more. And if you get that feeling, it's a calling from Allah, pray more. So if you get that feeling, don't ever deny it. Pray more. Sometimes you will, you'll find that doing the 5 prayers is the limit of what you are able to perform. And that's fine, as long as you maintain and preserve the 5 prayers. The other thing I want to point to is that there are, every now and then, and now it's been for years like that, I get the question, well, why is it that we pray in Arabic? Why do the prayers have to be in Arabic? And I want to address that right now because it's a recurrent theme. Allah could have chosen and did choose languages for revelation, whether it's Hebrew or Arabic or whether it's a language of revelation is probably not Aramaic, but at least the language is important because, and I'll give you a strange example for the context, but if you, and I'm not inviting you to do so, I'm just giving you an example, is that if those who learn the magic of Sulaiman, and it's not a good thing to learn it in the modern age, so please don't do it. But if you, in the magic of Sulaiman, you repeat the words the phonetics of the words, the articulation of the words in the original language has a power of its own. Language, phonetics affect the environment, shape the environment. So the fact that the Quran is in Arabic is not a coincidence. It is a power. The Quran in Arabic, even if you just turn the Quran on in a room and leave the room, and if you come back to this room, the energy and the aura of the room has changed. It has changed. And I've tried that in homes of non-Muslims. I've tried that in homes of people that have nothing to do with Islam whatsoever. And it is remarkable, the power. In the same way, by the way, that bringing a cross in a room has an effect on the aura. Unfortunately, not a good one. That's why hauntings, when they occur and you try to combat them with the cross, have hauntings in the Christian context are awful. Possessions and things like that, awful. They reach awful degrees. People don't realize it's partly because of the way that the cross is, the symbol of the cross, as a symbol of the torment of Jesus and so on, is mocked. The Quran has a powerful cleansing effect. So yes, learning to utter the Quran in the original language is its own power. But equally as important is learning the meaning of what you're saying. So it is much better to learn the Fatiha and learn Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad, for instance, and repeat it every prayer than to learn surahs and you don't know their meaning and you're just repeating them. Now, the dua that you do, dua al-qunut in prayer, you can do in any language. And in fact, I encourage people is that when they are doing sujood, other than saying Subhana Rabbi al-Ala, Subhana Rabbi al-Ala, Subhana Rabbi al-Ala, if they find their power in the original language, that in prostration, in sujood, pray in English. Ask Allah for whatever you want beyond saying Subhana Rabbi al-Ala 3 times. Now, of course, a lot of people, a lot of long-time converts, they start internalizing Subhana Rabbi al-Ala so much that they find enormous amount of power in repeating it as many times as they want. Shorten your ruku' and prolong your sujood. Ruku' is but a salute. You're just saluting. You're saying salat no. And the iqamah after ruku' where you Subhanallah wa hamida, it's an opportunity for dua. So as standing before you do the prostration, you can continue on with dua if you wish. There are various things about that. But anyway, then beyond the Subhana Rabbi al-Ala 3 times, you have absolute freedom to do dua as you wish. And you are closest to Allah, especially in the second sajda. So it is always recommended that if you go to prolong your sujood, prolong the second sajda. And when you get very good at it, you will accumulate the energy to the last rak'ah. And the last rak'ah in the last sajda will be the most powerful. And what you will experience in the last rak'ah, in the last sajda, in the last rak'ah, will be a sum total of the energy that you've accumulated in the rak'ahs that you performed and the sajdas that you performed before. Are you connecting with any of this? Or
yes.
Just, okay. Because, you know, in the day and age we live in, you never know. You know, all modern Muslims are so a byproduct of commercialism and materialism and its close kin, Wahhabism, because Wahhabism and commercialism and materialism are siblings. They wedded each other and founded each other very convenient brides. That's why some of the best consumers in the world are Wahhabis. I mean, it's all about consumption and all the stuff we talk about, which was the essence of Islam for centuries, it just goes above their heads. But you must understand that that is the essence of your faith. We are a religion as old as humanity itself. And sujood and salah is as old as humanity. And it is the salah, the Muslim form of salah, that is the way that Allah has been worshipped from the time of creation till today. It is not people on their knees. It is people prostrating before the Lord. One final footnote, I mean, even some of the very interesting material that you can look at in the medieval hermits that when they are represented, they're often represented worshiping God and very in a position very close to sujood, which is fascinating. But anyway, okay, questions. That's all I have.
So what we want to do is have like 2 or 3 people ask the questions at the same time, and then so we can make sure we get them in. Go ahead.
You were talking about how prayer is supposed to be, or one of the functions of prayer is it's supposed to serve as a resistance to injustice. And I just wanted to ask you about a kind of trend that I see with modern Muslims in terms of, I don't know, I guess I have in mind the sort of controversy with Sheikh Hamza and Sheikh bin Bay about the support they give to the UAE and about this trend of kind of in a strange dialectical sense using Islam to actually sort of support oppression as opposed to being resistance to it, and the tendency I see in modern Muslims to sort of, rather than resist these sort of oppressive regimes, to actually sort of lend them credence, if not explicitly, implicitly. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts in relation to what we talked about in terms of the purpose of prayer, because I kind of see it as flipping the whole tradition on its head, like literally flipping it on its head.
Can you please talk about Dua al-Qunut? And like, because like in many Muslims that like, especially in Salat al-Witr, usually in Ramadan, they usually make the dua after the ruku' and before the sujood. Like, if you can like elaborate on that, why is that, and like the different variations, if there's any other opinions, please.
I have a question about the number of rak'ahs that needs to be done. Earlier you mentioned when there's a personal invitation in the heart from God to pray more, just to pray more, like obey that intuition to do more in those cyclicals. Is that like the main premise to follow? Because if I'm not mistaken, I heard like in a Hanafi, like the extra nawafil 15 cycles is pretty much like you cannot, if it has become a habit of not doing the extra 15, then it could be considered like haram, or it's more like juristical kind of stuff only.
Next round.
Okay. About the easier actually, let me take the issue of injustice first, because it's, I think, we throughout history, unfortunately, there are people who believe that they say they're Muslim, Aslamtu Lillah, but they believe, but then they fail to fully understand the implications of submission to the one and only. The best way that I have read it put is that the right of all creation, what all creation is entitled to, is salam. Is that what, whether it's peace, tranquility, well-being. I mean, salam can have the meaning of all of that, right? And or some people just define it as the antithesis of al-ifsad, or fasad, the antithesis of corruption. Now, the issue is recognizing injustice ironically, Ibn Taymiyyah is the one who said this, that recognizing injustice is simply as simple as looking around you and seeing whether a particular ruler is denying people the right to salam, being in a state of well-being. When Ibn Taymiyyah is asked, why are you such a troublemaker? And why are you constantly opposing and so on? He said, well, don't you see that people are in prison or thrown in dungeons? And then he said, well, maybe the ruler imprisoned them for good cause. And he said, and Ibn Taymiyyah's response is, it is sufficient for me to see that people are suffering and deny the state of well-being for me to recognize injustice. And in the act of submission to God, you immediately, by definition, then you must reject any human being that demands submission to himself or herself as if they are the likes of God. And that's the entire problem, is that, for, I think, a fair person, they will look at Ibn Zayd or look at Ibn Salman or look at Sisi or look at whatever rulers are around. And they will recognize that you cannot utter a fair critique in front of them, in their presence, and that you cannot defy them or disagree with them without them destroying you. And for a fair person, that is enough to recognize that they're unjust. And then to say that my submission to the Lord, and by the way, this is what the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Bahrainis could call political Islam. Political Islam is if you say that your submission to the Lord means that you refuse to submit to anyone else and that you take a stand, a principled stand against injustice. Now, how did Muslims get to that point? Is it a long history of despotism? All of humanity has suffered despotism, but no one, because I've written the book literally on rebellion in Islamic history. It's published by Cambridge. No group of people have been in a constant state of insurgency and rebellion against injustice as Muslims have. I mean, if the history of the Islamic world is rewritten, no period in Islamic history has seen and in the opinion of some, that it has led to a lot of instability and political turmoil because Muslims have constantly rejected injustice and constantly rebelled against it in endless cycles. Unfortunately, among modern Muslims, I cannot ignore, and I'm really sad to say this, and I don't say it lightly, I cannot ignore the corrupting influence of oil money. Because I've seen people who will resist everything. And as we said, money is not coercion. The dangerous thing about money is that, and it doesn't even need to be a direct bribe. To tempt someone, all you have to do is come and say, we want to do a program for you on this television station or that television station, and the contract that you get for the episodes that will broadcast during Ramadan for 30 nights, because I've seen a lot of people get bought this way. During Ramadan, you'll appear on TV, 30 episodes, you'll get a paycheck for that much. The corrupting influence of oil money, even someone like Bin Bayah, who I respect and has a history of being a pious and good person, it is very difficult and very, very difficult to resist the limelight and the temptation of celebration and aggrandizement, and at the same time, very difficult to be aware and conscious of the suffering of other human beings as you're being celebrated. and honored. And that is the crux of what we're talking about, right? Is that you are accepting celebrations and honors at the same moment that the prisons are full of people that are suffering unjustly. It's very difficult, and it's a true test from Allah to take a stand at that point and say, no, I don't want to be celebrated. Because no, I reject being celebrated by you because you're unjust. It's very difficult. And I was raised, I spent many years in Kuwait, and I've seen what oil money can do to people. And I've seen what it did in Egypt, I've seen what it did I spent also a period of time in the Emirat, visited Qatar several times and so on. I mean, maybe it's, now of course, you know, some people, if you go and can factor in colonialism and the type of psychological maladies that colonialism have left. But I really think even colonialism, people could have recouped from colonialism. And colonialism didn't affect Muslims in the West. It affected, yes, immigrants to the West. That's absolutely true. But oil money continues to be corrupting. I mean, when I see what the Emirat, because the Emirat now is being very aggressive in, they're making a major initiative to, quote unquote, buy Islam in the West because they think the Islam of care is political Islam. And, you know, there was an article in England about how Saudi Arabia and the Emirat are trying to destabilize and the two Muslim
Omar and
that were elected to the Congress.
And then the Egyptian brother that was in Michigan.
I mean, it's amazing. It's like they see the election of Muslims to Congress as political Islam, and that they can't allow that. And they want Muslim organizations in the United States to oppose these people in Congress, these Muslims in Congress, because they want an Islam that's dead, an Islam in which prostration to Allah means McDonald's and Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken and you know, all the rock concerts that Riyadh has been having, and all the obscene materialism that you find when you go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. Obscene materialism. If you don't have a lot of money, you're nothing. And human trafficking is a reality in Dubai, and you meet human trafficked people everywhere you go in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. It's like saying good morning to another human trafficked person, and they want that to be all Islam, and they want Islam in the West to accept that. So you don't find, unfortunately, in the people that they're buying them in the U.S. or they're buying in the U.S., they don't say one word against human trafficking. They will not say anything about human trafficking in Saudi or Emirat, or how offensive and disgusting it is, and how a Muslim cannot stand for it. It is, you know, oil money was given initially to Muslims after colonialism as a blessing to help Muslims rise from colonialism and gain health. Muslims turned it because of despotism, by the way, because if Saudi Arabia and the Emirat had democratic governments, they would have never become what they've become. It turned into a curse, into a hellish curse, because it became the venue to everything that we can imagine as truly satanic. Just materialism, hedonistic materialism and consumerism without any principle beyond it. I do not know how you can prostrate meaningfully to Allah and wake up the next day and ignore all the human, or just the women from Eastern Europe that are trafficked in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Just the numbers on that alone. How can you that be consistent with your salah? I don't understand it. How can you go to an Islamic conference here and give a lecture and praise the rulers of the Emirat and ignore their human rights record and ignore the people that they torture and that they imprison and they kill? It boggles my mind. And of course, when you say, I mean, I understand, and I'm sure you know that of all the Muslim scholars in the West, I am probably among less than a handful that will openly and frankly talk about the Emirat of Saudi Arabia that way. And why? Because there's a cost. And the cost is you will never see a dime. And does that affect you? Of course it affects you. I mean, but that's a choice. You either... Huh? Well, you pick either you truly believe that your goal is a hereafter, or you're not in sync with yourself. You're a hypocrite with yourself, and that's something else. You know, the temptation of oil money is just grotesque.
It just seems like, if I maybe like heard, it just seems like in the prostration, Allah is being supplanted with the state. Like instead of prostrating to Allah, people
Yeah, I mean, look at the
state.
Even someone like Sheikh al-Mughamsi recently about Ibn Salman. He was talking on, you know, and this is someone that recites the Quran and all that stuff, and then he says about Ibn Salman, the crown prince, that well, you know, I think that he is guided. He has a secret with Allah. Allah has given him a secret revelation, and that's why we have to trust him. I mean, that's the point that you get to when you are not willing to accept the full implications of what submitting to Allah is. I mean, and I'll tell you that where I was raised in Egypt, the lecture on submission and the meaning of submission, it would always be closed lecture, because we would always be worried that if Amn al-Dawla is present, that there would be arrests. Because remarkably, although you can spend the entire lecture and not mention Mubarak a single time, but the mere fact of what it means to submit to Allah would get you thrown in the Mu'taqad, in political prison and tortured and so on. So that, even that secrecy, I realize, has even affected me to this day, because when I talk about the full meaning of prayer, I don't want it to be an open session. You know, I deal with it. I was telling Grace earlier, I want it to be a closed session. And I kept, you know, I'm thinking all night about this. Last night, I thought, why do I want it to be closed session? I think it's just the fact that, but part of it, of course, that you know that it is trouble, because when people people are not going to like the fact that you're telling them, in order to be in true state of sujood, and in order to do the full implications of prayer, that you must oppose injustice and you must protest injustice and be in a constant state of protest against injustice, and your salah must constantly remind you of what justice and injustice is, and that Allah has already told us that taghut, oppression, is injustice, no ifs, ands, or buts, and it's as simple as that. So when you have someone, and I knew Khashoggi, I mean, but there are so many Khashoggis. I mean, I can't pretend that there's just, my friend Khashoggi got killed and that's only, no, there are tons of them, I mean, tons. And the fact that it is the people who do sujood that are afflicted by this. You know, it's like Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali used to say that the fact that it is Muslims who are behind all nations in education is such a contradiction, because no religion emphasized the value of knowledge as much as Islam. Now, the same irony, I think, exists in the case of oppression. The fact that it is Muslims among all the people in the world that are have despotism and injustice and the skill we do, for someone like me, I cannot describe it other than demonic. And until we Muslims recognize it as demonic and resist it as demonic, not something to be tolerated, but demonic, it's a non-starter. In the same that a Muslim can exist and be neutral about what, you know, what happens with race and in the U.S. As a Muslim, my class on Islamophobia is a class on race, and it's part of the critical race studies program at the law school. But I engaged race studies as a Muslim, as an Islamic imperative. I never thought that I had a choice. I never thought that, you know, I could or could not, if I want or if I don't want. I always thought that as a Muslim I have no choice. The fact that there are Muslims that, you know, can watch police shootings, I'm sure are aware of the attitude that marks our entire civilization when it comes to race, and just, you know, go on as if it doesn't exist, as if everything's fine, is bewildering. Okay, so, yeah, that gets me heated.
Sorry. My bad.
No, it is just, it's, yeah, I mean, and I, you know, I do believe that at the end, it is whatever is clean and pure and truthful is what will prevail. And that's my conviction as a Muslim. In the same way that the divine will always prevail, the godly will always prevail. It is, you know, I look at all the obscenely fancy conferences that Muslims have in Gulf countries, and I see nothing remotely Islamic in it. You know, they all meet, they all engage in a bunch of rhetoric, they all kiss up to the rulers, sheikh this and sheikh this and sheikh that, and then they go home. But that's not what's going to live. That's not what's going to call people to their conscience when all is said and done and we all leave this earth. It can't be. It will not. The sunan are exactly that. The sunan. Part of the calamity, part of the problem is that you find especially in conservative cultures, an emphasis on number of rak'ahs rather than the substance of rak'ahs. So you find a lot, you know, you have to pray all the sunan, 2 before Fajr, 2 before Dhuhr, after 2 before and after, or 4 before and after, depending, 2 after Maghrib, and so on, and then the Sunan of Aisha, Aisha. That's all fine, but only if you can perform the Sunan and live their spirit, only if they bring you closer to Allah. sunan that are repeated, because I've seen a lot of people, they perform the sunan and it's like they just want to get them over with because they're just in the habit of doing them. And they don't even focus on their prayer. They're telling you, they may be, out of the entire prayer, they'll focus maybe 5%. Other than that, they're just Allahu Akbar and that's repeating. I would rather that they pray the furud with a greater degree of concentration. Now, as you do the furud and your piety increases and you find joy in salah, happiness, you actually long to do the salah, not like, oh, I've got to get up and pray Isha, and oh my, no, you're actually eager. You will naturally be drawn to the sunnah, because the sunnah is what opens door between you and Allah in ways that, but not the dogmatic way that they're done. I've known people like, people who pray the fard and sunnah and then will not enjoin the good or forbid the evil or say a single word of or mistreat their servant girl from the villages, or go to eat in restaurants, as I grew up with that. They go eat in restaurants and so on, and not even bother thinking whether they're being served by trafficked human beings or not. The prayer has not penetrated into their heart, has not cleansed their soul. So, by all means, but sunnah cannot become dogma. The Prophet ﷺ, as qurratu aynih, that his true joy in life was in prayer. And the first thing that he taught Muslims about prayer is to fully absorb its meaning and to find the joy in all of us Muslims at one point or another, especially when we do the taslim and we finish prayer, there's like it lasts, for most people, it lasts like a short few seconds where there's a sense right after you do this taslim, is like a sense of like deep restfulness, and like as if all the pressures of life have been removed. What prayer does is to be able to take these few seconds that you experience, and most people experience after they finish their prayer, and make it a state of being. A state of being that where it lasts from the beginning of prayer till the end of prayer. And that, when you experience that, you will covet the sunnah by yourself. No one will need to tell you. So, just and especially in a day and age where, I don't know if most Muslims pray or don't pray. I don't want to even speculate about that. But there are so many Muslims that don't even do the 5 prayers. And I say, just do the 5 prayers. Because without the 5 prayers, I don't know whether Allah will accept you as a Muslim. That's up to Allah, but I don't know. My own personal belief is that without 5 prayers, you're really at risk that Allah will say, I treat you like a non-Muslim. I think that is the backbone of Islam, as I said. Whoever, and this is why part of the way why I am so critical of Shihab Ahmad's book, because Shihab Ahmad's book, if you read it, it basically, the conclusion of it, that you can even be a good Muslim without salah, without siyam, without to me, that's a destruction of Islam, because then it's Islam without theology, and the theology of prayer is critical for your relationship to Allah. The dua al-qunut, it's actually a good question. The reason that dua al-qunut especially is because it's the jama'i dua. The dua in sujood is not uttered in jama'ah. But all the, and a good start is just read Ihya Ulumuddin and the chapter on Salah by Hamd al-Ghazali, because he talks about this. Is that in the, as in a state of qiyam, we stand in rows, just as we will be appear before our Lord in the hereafter, when you're in position of standing. And our dua can be unified as a people, because we will meet Allah as as they say, as nations. But once once you are in sujood, your dua becomes personalized, and it becomes between you and Allah, after the tasbihat, of course. And that's the main difference between the dua that is done while standing up, is that could be collective dua, and the dua. Now, and sadly, among modern Muslims who schools of theology have become weak, the madrasas have become weak, so much of our tradition has become, after colonialism, become so that people still do the dua al-qunut, but people are not reminded and not taught of the great power of dua in the state of sujood. And that, in fact, as individuals, that's where you are closest to Allah, and that where you should extend your dua in and open your heart as much as you can. Okay.
I think we have another round, so I have some in. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask for help in dealing with this contradiction between divine time and secular time, because I feel like a lot of times, like, the initial impetus to get up and pray comes from a super, like, worldly or temporal source, like a phone or a computer, and sometimes that feeling kind of, like, permeates through the ablution salat. And so I don't know if that's just, like, a weakness of the mind, like that's some sense that you should be able to let go before you start your salat, or if there are some other, like, practical suggestions about, like, when to know when to pray.
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm smiling because yeah. Okay.
And I have.
Okay.
So this is from an email that someone wrote. So she said, what are some concrete ways in which we can increase taqwa or make our quote-unquote molecules change, as you said in the previous halaqa, by reading tasbih? Talk about that. And then you've already sort of addressed this, but one of my frustrations with sort of New Age Muslims, I will refer to them as, is when they're trying to encourage people to start praying, they say, oh, even if you can just pray one prayer, just one a week or one a whatever, it's sort of like half, whatever, as a gentle way in. I mean, I personally don't like that, but I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Okay. Actually, there's divine time is very much a part of the transformation of molecules, because one of the remarkable things like with my mother, she had and a lot of my teachers, including Sheikh Ghazali, Allah yarhamu, they had an internal clock of prayer, and it becomes so innate that in all the years I've never seen my mother oversleep prayer once. And she wasn't born this way, but it is truly amazing. I mean, even when she was sick, her eyes just open when it comes time for the 5 prayers. And I've seen her pray in bed when she was very ill, but it becomes, it's remarkable that the transformation and the way that your brain becomes connected to divine time. Now, I have in Muslim world, you're assisted by the adhan going off. And of course, in our modern world, well, we can sort of program the adhan in all these apps where the adhan goes off, which which is good, except that the adhan from a minbar does affect the molecules of the air, and it does no doubt affect the entire atmosphere of a locality. But anyway. I don't like alarm clocks because of that reason. I feel it is an intrusion of, and I'm not even comfortable with electronic adhans because now I've always wondered, is it just because I'm a Stone Age human being, or is it because there's something not comfortable about electronic adhans? But I will put it. I mean, like exercise, like you're a martial arts person, right? Like a lot of it starts out awkwardly, but there is something in you when you force yourself to be constantly conscious of Fajr, of the time for Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. There comes a point, subhanAllah, that just clicks, and it's as if your subconscious just gets it. And I can tell you with absolute certitude, there comes a point where you will not need alarm clocks, and you will not need, your body will know, and you will know that, and although the time changes, you will know. And that's the most amazing thing, is that, we have sometimes the sun goes down at 9 p.m., but somehow your body knows that it's time for Fajr, it's time for Isha, it's time for Maghrib. And the closest thing I can is like martial arts. You just do it at first very awkwardly, and then it just clicks. And the same thing with the tasbih and the changing the molecules is that Allah repeats in the Quran time and time and time again that the importance of a state of dhikr whenever we can remember. I mean, literally, Allah describes it as those who are in a state of dhikr, whether lying down or sitting or standing up. And to start out wanting to be in a constant state of dhikr is unrealistic, and you start out with baby steps. You start out by saying, okay, I commit that after each prayer I'm going to utter 100, and even it's okay to use misbah beats to count them. I'm going to utter 100 takbirat, or 100 tasbihat, or tahmidat, whatever, subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. Takbirat is Allahu Akbar, tasbihat is subhanallah, tahmidat, alhamdulillah. So just repeat, or saying, I'm going to commit to say 30 Allahu Akbar, 30 subhanallah, 30 alhamdulillah. And as I'm saying that, I'm going to commit. If you want to control your concentration, say, okay, start out with just 10. I'm going to say 10 Allahu Akbar, 10 alhamdulillah, and 10 subhanallah, but I'm going to think about Allahu Akbar and what it means, subhanallah what it means, and alhamdulillah what it means. What it means to recognize that God is great. God is the greatest. What does it mean to recognize I'm grateful to God? What does it mean to recognize that I am in praise of God, that life should be in the same, that entire creation praises God, the animals, the plants, And what does it mean for me to be part of that symphonic supplication of God? To be a part of the entire universe in a state of constant supplication. If you commit to something and do it regularly, the Prophet ﷺ actually has a hadith in which that to commit to something regularly is better than to commit to a lot and do it irregularly. So and then expand in steps. So, first you could begin with, okay, I'm doing the tasbih and dua after I pray Fajr, and then after that, I'm going to, after I pray Fajr, after I pray Isha. And then you expand it, step little by little. And as you expand, and again, because I'm an academic, I say I am sure of something with only very rarely, but on this I can say with absolute certitude that if you commit to it and you stick to it, your very molecules transform. You become a different human being, and your perception of reality changes. The way you see colors in the air changes. And absolutely no doubt about that, because I've seen it time and time again. For those who do it with concentration, and a little that you can concentrate on is better than a lot, where your mind drifts and starts thinking of the bills or of work or where you have to go or what you're going to eat. I mean, because that's better than nothing, but it's not going to get you the type of quality that we're talking about, the type of transformative process. Finally, the issue of do one prayer and so on. The covenant with Allah is 5 prayers a day. Now, if you want to get used to a relationship with Allah, then I would say, okay, if you're a new convert and you just want to build a relationship with Allah, but you don't want to commit to the 5 prayers a day, then might as well just tell them to do sujood every night. Just do sujood and do dua. Is it the 5 prayers? No. Are they going to get what you get from the 5 prayers? Absolutely not. Are they absolutely defective and far removed from what the backbone of Islam is? My point is that I don't see a point from saying do 1 salah a week or 1 salah a day. Might as well tell them to just do prostration or just sit in dua, because the 1 salah a day is not the 5 prayers, and it's a different animal, because what they're not doing is they're not keeping divine time. And when you keep divine time, it's a transformative process. It's like someone coming and saying, well, this Sibelius violin concerto is very difficult. So, instead of playing the entire concerto with, just play it in this key, just enough that you do these keys. Well, sure, but it's not the violin concerto. It's a completely different animal. It's just, it's a little bite, but it's not the violin concerto. So it's just not the symphonic relationship with Allah. Now, if you want to teach them something, then tell them, okay, do prostration every day, do dua every day, do dua ruku every day. I think it's important as a convert to immediately adopt the backbone of Islam and train in the backbone of Islam, because otherwise you do not taste the sweetness of being a Muslim and the challenge. it is not about just telling people, Islam is just a belief in mercy and peace and so on, and there you go. And Islam is faith and practice. It's a serious commitment towards the divine, and it's a liberation of the soul through the exercise of the body. And you simply deny that if you don't do it.
So like, I mean, if you're a convert, isn't it better, because from what you said before, if you don't do the 5 prayers, God could very easily say, well, you're not really Muslim. So wouldn't you?
I mean, if you say you're a convert, meaning you take the Shahada, legally, as a matter of law, you're a Muslim. But in God's eyes, as far as from my madhab, in God's eyes, if you ask me, is it likely that God will accept you as a Muslim? No. My answer is no.
And then how about similarly for people who are born Muslims that are reconnecting with their faith? Where people say, oh, just, it's better to just jump in and do.
Until you do the 5 prayers, in my madhab, in my school of thought, you are running. It's like walking on a line without a safety net. You are really risking, and we can never say that Allah will do this, because that's impinging upon God's sovereignty, and we don't dare not. And while I fervently pray, because out of love for people, that Allah accepts their shahada and would accept them as a Muslim even without prayer, but for all what I learned from the Prophet, I very much doubt that they'll be accepted as Muslims. They'll be, treated like all other non-Muslims are treated. Rewarded for their good deeds and punished for their bad deeds. But they're denied that majestic relationship that comes from engaging in the entire dynamic, because the 5 prayers is like the music of a full-fledged concerto. Or, you can't mess around with it without corrupting it. You can't pluck a little out and pluck a little in and still have the same effect. I'm giving this the Sibelius example because I've been on and off in my life. I've been obsessed with this concerto, and but some people perform it without orchestra and violin, and they just do piano. Okay, piano and violin. It's horrendous. It's egregious. Your ears are bleeding. You can't do that. That's not what it is. Or someone decides, okay, I'm going to do flute and violin. Disgusting. No, don't do it. Or practice at home. Don't post it on the net. And offend our ears. So yeah, it's more or less.
Any more questions?
I have questions basically about practical tips to take home when doing prayers. And, usually one of the challenges like paying bills or concentrations, like how to do khushu. And sometimes for mundane things, or just praying, asking too much, being absorbed in the selfish, requesting this and that during sujood, and just simply forgets what rak'ah am I in? Am I supposed to do salam right after I wake up from sujood?
If you're concerned about asking, it will that's not what will make you confused about your rak'ahs. Interestingly enough, if you're asking for material things, you'll be conscious of what rak'ahs you're in. It is the drifting of the mind that often makes you forget what rak'ah you're in. And there is no secret to it. The best way is to try to practice. You know, what I found helpful is that when you think, like for instance, you're reading the Fatiha. When I was a child, I used to do that. So I would have a mental image associated with each ayah. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I picture, when I was a kid, I would picture a little girl with her hand raised towards God. And then Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And then I would picture an old man in, you know, I used to picture an old man going like this. And so I had a mental image association with each ayah. And as I recited each ayah to myself, what I would have pop in my mind is the mental image. And being these mental images prevented my mind from drifting. Now, of course, as I grew up, as I think of all my mental images, I sort of chuckle. It was very, you know, I don't want to tell you what the other mental images were, but they were all like that. But they were all, you know, I had a mental image of a bird flying, I had a mental image of a deer walking, but these mental images really helped me from having my mind drift to school and grades and exams and, you know, my friends and whatever was going on in life. And then eventually, as I grew up, you didn't need them anymore. Then your mind became immediately just honed into onto what the words are. But the mental images, of course, it helps when the mental images have a relation to the words you're reciting. So, you know, when you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most compassionate, don't have a mental image of war or someone dying. You know, have a mental image of something compassionate and merciful. And they help as a training. It's sort of like, you know, these wheels that you attach to training bikes for little children. It's like that. Now, of course, this is a little bit of a bid'ah because I invented that. And I never told my teachers that that's what I did. And it's the first time that I actually say it anywhere. So I actually don't know what my teachers would have thought if I would have told them that I did that. But they got me to where I wanted to go. And so, try it. I would like to know if it actually works for anyone else. And don't be impatient because, you know, think of the mental habits that you develop, you know, for all the years in your age. You know, we get into habits, consumption habits of what, you know, horrible habits for our bodies, for our souls, for our spirits. And imagine now, thankfully, because of God's grace, we don't need an equal number of years to break a bad habit. Imagine if, you know, you're 30 years old and you've practiced a bad habit for 30 years. If you needed 30 years to break a habit of 30 years, that would have been disastrous. Because then you become 60 by the time that you've actually broken a habit. Through God's grace, breaking the habit comes much sooner. And you'll need months, not years. But you have to stick with it. You have to persevere with it.
7:06.
Okay.
This is great.
7 o'clock, good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
No, don't stop.